Hey guys, tonight we step straight into the cobbled chaos of ancient Rome, where the air tastes of wood smoke, sweat, and the faint tang of olive oil sizzling in street corner pans. Imagine yourself drifting through narrow lanes between looming stone tenements, voices rising and falling in Latin all around you. Market sellers, hawk figs, and bread soldiers clang past in armor, and somewhere behind a carved wooden door, there are stories you'd blush to overhear. This is your first night in Rome, and you probably won't survive this unless you can handle the noise, the smells, and the thousand little secrets that everyone here pretends not to see. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And drop your location and your local time in the comments. I'm always curious to know where in the world you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You press deeper into the street's lantern light, flickering against frescoed walls, the city's rhythm like a heartbeat in your ears. Secondhand gossip drifts by, someone whispering about an affair in the Senate, another grumbling about the price of garum fish sauce. You wonder how anyone sleeps here. A donkey brays, a child cries, and yet behind closed doors, the Roman night is full of softer mysteries. The empire is proud of its grandeur, its forums, its soaring aqueducts. But in between the monuments are lives, driven by the same instincts that keep you awake now: food, comfort, and the warm tangle of companionship. Historians still argue whether ordinary Romans really believed the official ideals of chastity and virtue, or whether those were just the marble masks worn for ceremony. Walk long enough, and you'll see both masks and the truths behind them. On one corner, a shrine glows with offerings, flowers, wine, and a little statue of Venus, goddess of love. You pause, noting how even religion here mixes sanctity with desire. The offering plate holds figs that look suspiciously like yesterday's leftovers. Perhaps Venus is less picky than the priests want you to think. Quirky details: some Romans carried tiny amulets shaped like you know what, not just as jokes, but as charms to ward off the evil eye. Picture your neighbor back home wearing that to the grocery store. The crowd thickens near the forum, the grand square humming with deals and debates. Senators wrapped in snowy togas stride by with studied dignity, though rumor insists half of them sneak to banquets where dignity takes the night off. The city is a theater, you realize, where everyone knows the script, but ad-libs constantly when the lights dim. The smell of bread tugs you toward a bakery tucked under an apartment block. Inside, workers dust flour from their arms and toss jokes that would make a magistrate blush. You grab a warm loaf, the crust crackling, and chew slowly as you wander on. Here taste is survival grains. Keep bellies full. Wine keeps water safe, and the rest, the banquets, the delicacies, the whispered assignations, that's for those with money and time. You glance upward at laundry lines crisscrossing the narrow sky tunics, flapping like banners. Ordinary families crowd into cramped insula-stacked apartments, prone to fires and collapses. Privacy is nearly impossible. If you lived here, every cough, every argument, every sigh of affection would be public knowledge by breakfast. You chuckle so much for secrets. Somewhere a flute begins to play soft notes winding between buildings. It feels oddly soothing amid the clamor, like a lullaby from centuries past. You imagine someone else long ago lying awake in this same city, listening to that same tune, wondering if tomorrow's chores will leave them too tired for romance. The continuity of human longing is almost comforting. Now your feet lead you toward the edge of the Palatine Hill, where wealth gathers behind heavy doors. You can sense the divide marble columns, frescoed walls, servants hurrying with amphorae of wine. Here indulgence is routine, and scandals often brew faster than honeyed mead. Remember that amulet, shaped like a certain body part. The elite might display a larger version in their gardens, half religious, half party joke. Nothing like a stone wink from the gods to start awkward conversations. You pause, taking it all in Rome alive at dusk streets, echoing with trade and laughter shadows, hiding schemes and soft embraces. You're an outsider here, stumbling through a world both familiar and alien. The city invites you closer, daring you to peek behind curtains, to sip from its goblets, to listen to its whispered confessions. The question is, will you survive long enough to learn what intimacy really meant beneath these marble facades? You slip out of the noisy streets and follow the stream of citizens toward one of the great Roman baths. Those cavernous temples, not of worship, but of water and steam. The scent of olive oil sweat and warm stone meets you before you even enter. Step inside, and the echoing chambers wrap around you, vaulted ceilings dripping with condensation, marble floors damp beneath your feet. You are expected to shed your clothes, though you fumble for a moment, feeling out of place. Everyone else moves with ease, as if the bath is as natural as breathing. The hum here is different from the streets, calmer, more measured, though hardly silent. You hear laughter bouncing from wall to wall, bursts of conversation muffled by steam. Men gather in groups, trading gossip about politics, about who was seen dining with whom, about which senator's daughter looks a little too happy these days. In one corner, a boy rubs oil across his father's back. In another, a pair of friends debate the merits of a new gladiator. Historians still argue whether these baths were purely for hygiene or whether they were a sly cover for subtler pursuits. You dip into the tepidarium warm water, soothing your muscles, the fog thick around you. The architecture is astonishing: mosaics, underfoot tiles, depicting dolphins and sea gods, and above skylights letting in shafts of golden light. You recline, listening, half present, half lost. This is where people come to wash away the dust, but also where society lets its guard down. Secrets slip as easily as towels. Mainstream fact: the Roman baths were central to daily life. Not just for the wealthy, entry fees were cheap enough that even modest folk could attend, though the grander complexes rivaled palaces. They were social equalizers, though you still noticed the distinctions: senators with perfumed oils, slaves rushing with bronze strigils, children playing with carved toys in the shallow pools. The rich used alabaster jars, the poor reused whatever they could. Quirky tidbit: some Romans believed rubbing themselves with pumice or even crocodile dung mixed into ointments could keep skin soft. Yes, crocodile dung. Imagine that as your next spa treatment. Sir, would you like the deluxe excrement exfoliation today? You chuckle, the steam carrying your laugh away. As you move into the caldarium, the hot room sweat beads immediately along your arms. The heat is intense, pressing, and you wonder how long you can last. Others sprawl happily, chatting, sipping watered wine. One man brags about last night's dinner. Apparently, he tried flamingo tongue, though he swears he prefers a simple plate of lentils. Another admits to slipping away during the feast for a quick tryst in the garden. You pretend not to listen, though your ears burn hotter than the air. You glide forward, noting how bodies glisten, how laughter mingles with the hiss of hot water poured across stones. For a moment, you feel the strange democracy of the place, noble and commoner alike, stripped down, sweating together, human first, status second. Yet even here, signals remain: the cut of a ring, the sheen of a bracelet, the subtle glance held just a shade too long. You wander toward the frigidarium, bracing yourself as you plunge into the cold pool. The shock is immediate, your breath catching skin tingling. Around you, shouts of surprise and delight echo. One man boasts he can stay submerged longer than anyone else. A woman nearby laughs at his bravado. The cold clears your head, but it also sharpens your senses. You become acutely aware of how every gesture and arm brushing yours, a splash too close, might carry meaning. Remember the Venus shrine from the street earlier? Here she seems to float in the steam as well. People invoke her lightly, half joke, half prayer. Venus preserve me, a man mutters when he slips on the wet marble, and laughter follows. Desire and daily life weave together seamlessly, never far apart, never fully acknowledged either. You climb out skin goose-pimpled and wrap a thin cloth around your shoulders. Servants offer oil, scrape it from your skin with curved strigils, leaving you gleaming. You notice how even this simple act feels intimate. One body tending another, the line between care and closeness blurred. Historians still debate whether these baths were fertile grounds for illicit meetings, or whether that's just our modern imagination painting steamier pictures than reality. Perhaps it was both, depending on who you asked, depending on what you hope to find. You linger as twilight creeps across the city outside, the baths still warm, voices still echoing. You realize this is more than hygiene, it's performance. It's society's stage without costumes. Everyone plays their part, yet everyone reveals more than they intend. You close your eyes, drifting with the murmur of voices, the splash of water, the soft scrape of bronze against skin. Rome breathes around you, and you breathe with it for now. You dry off from the baths and drift along marble colonnades, stomach beginning to growl. The scent of roasting meat and honeyed wine rides on the evening air, leading you toward a villa where tonight's entertainment is about to begin. A servant with carefully oiled curls bows low and gestures you inward. Before you know it, you're reclining on a low couch in a triclinium, the Roman dining hall, where guests sprawl rather than sit. The table gleams with silverware platters of olives, figs, and fish sauce, glistening in the lamplight. You're both guest and intruder, swept into the swirl of voices and aromas. Your host, a senator with more rings than fingers, welcomes everyone with a smile that looks rehearsed. He brags about the garum imported from Spain, though half the guests make faces when they taste its salty punch. Still, they praise it loudly. Nobody wants to insult the man paying for the feast. You reach for a fig, the sweetness soft against your tongue, and realize that half the meal is theater. Historians still argue whether Roman banquets were primarily for nourishment, or if they were simply stages for power and flirtation. Watching the quick glances exchanged across couches, you suspect the latter. Mainstream fact, Roman banquets usually had 3 courses: gustatio appetizers, prima mensa, main dishes, and secunda mensa desserts. Tonight, you taste eggs drizzled with honey roasted dormice, sprinkled with poppy seeds, and pork flavored with dates. You make a mental note never to underestimate Roman culinary imagination. Quirky tidbit: did you know some Romans thought eating lettuce after the meal acted as an aphrodisiac? Others swore it was the opposite, a kind of sleep-inducing sedative. You eye the bowl of limp leaves, suspiciously wondering if your host is hinting at something by piling it high on your plate. As wine flows, the conversation loosens. Someone begins reciting verses of Ovid lines about love and longing that draw nervous laughter. Another tells a joke about a centurion's armor squeaking at the worst possible moment, and even the stern matron at the end of the couch snorts. 3 jokes per evening seems the Roman minimum. The light grows softer shadows, curling on frescoed walls depicting gods in all their mischievous poses. You find yourself gazing at one painting Venus rising from the sea flanked by dolphins. The imagery feels less like art and more like a suggestion. It's as if the room itself conspires to push your thoughts in certain directions. Your neighbor, reclining close, offers you a slice of cheese drizzled with honey. The gesture is casual, but you catch the sparkle in their eye. Around you, subtle touches ripple: a hand brushing a sleeve, a foot stretching a little too far under the shared table. The banquet is as much about who leans toward whom as it is about flamingo tongues and wine. Remember the baths earlier when every gesture seemed loaded? Here the effect is multiplied. The couches are arranged so everyone faces one another in semi-reclined intimacy. Eating while lying down puts you at eye level with the person across the table, your gaze crossing theirs with every sip. You realize the architecture of dining practically encourages intrigue. A musician enters with a small harp, plucking notes that ripple through the room like warm water. The host claps proud of his hired entertainment. You close your eyes, letting the sound wash over you, and for a moment, you feel transported not just across centuries, but into the strange blend of indulgence and performance that defines Rome. The wine keeps flowing. One guest brags he can drink more than anyone else, only to hiccup mid-boast, causing the room to erupt in laughter. Another quotes Stoic philosophy, insisting moderation is key, though his empty cup betrays him. A senator's wife leans in and whispers to a friend, her eyes darting toward the gladiator, seated 2 couches away, invited as exotic decoration for the evening. The mix of politics, desire, and food is heady. You feel dizzy, and not just from the wine. Historians still debate whether all Romans indulged in such lavish affairs, or if only the elite lived this way. Likely, most citizens never saw half these dishes surviving, instead on bread porridge and the occasional slice of goat cheese. Yet here tonight, you are in the thick of luxury, surrounded by people who treat abundance as a birthright. The laughter swells, the harp plays faster, and servants sweep away empty dishes to bring the next course. You lick honey from your fingers and lean back, wondering if you're full or simply overwhelmed. Either way, you sense the night has only just begun, and you're not sure whether you'll emerge stuffed with food tangled in secrets or both. The room grows warmer, laughter louder, and the wine sweeter. You recline further on the couch, eyes drifting toward the parade of dishes being carried in by weary servants. This is Rome's specialty, turning dinner into spectacle. You watch as a jellyfish dish quivers in its bowl, jiggling with each thud of footsteps. The host beams proud of his chef's creativity, while half the room exchanges skeptical glances. Historians still argue whether these extreme foods were actually eaten or simply displayed as a symbol of wealth. Either way, the strangeness is real enough tonight. Mainstream fact-wealthy Romans often used exotic imports to demonstrate status. Peacocks, ostrich eggs, and even camel heels made appearances at the most eccentric tables. Food wasn't just nourishment. It was a way of saying, I control the far reaches of the empire, and I can afford to eat its creatures. Quirky tidbits and banquets were said to feature courses designed to trick the eye, like a roasted pig that, when carved, spilled live birds flying into the room. You glance at the main table, nervously, half expecting feathers to burst from the next dish. Your stomach tightens at the thought, though the idea of pigeons dive-bombing the cheese plate does make you smile. The drinking games begin as goblets refill. A senator challenges the gladiator guest to a contest. Each must recite a line of poetry before downing a cup of wine. The gladiator stumbles through a verse about Mars, the god of war, earning a round of applause. You politely decline when someone nudges you to join in. You're just trying to survive the jellyfish, not humiliate yourself with slurred Latin. The atmosphere grows rowdier. A woman at the far couch starts throwing pomegranate seeds at her neighbor, who retaliates with a fig. Soon, half the table is in on it, a playful food fight that earns glares from the servants. The host pretends to scold, but secretly enjoys the chaos. You duck as a rogue seed bounces off the wall near your head. Between the antics, you catch the subtle undercurrent. Not all eyes are on the food. Some linger on one another a beat too long, lips curling with private jokes. The banquets are part theater, part marketplace of attraction. You notice bracelets slipping lower on arms' tunics, draped looser as the night deepens. Every laugh is an invitation, every refill of wine a test of limits. Remember the lettuce from earlier. Someone insists on serving it again, winking as they slide it across the table. The debate reignites stimulant or sedative. One old man declares it made him dream of goddesses, while his skeptical wife insists it only made him snore. You can't decide which version is funnier. The harpist plucks a quicker rhythm, now spurring a group to start clapping along. The gladiator, emboldened by wine, begins recounting tales of the arena, how he once faced 2 lions and lived. Half the room gasps, half rolls their eyes. Historians still debate how much gladiators were admired versus scorned. Tonight, at least admiration wins. A servant brings out what looks like an enormous pie. The crust is golden, the scent tempting. With a dramatic flourish, the cook slices it open out Flutterdove's wings, beating frantically around the room. Guests shriek, laugh, and duck. One lands on your shoulder before darting away. There it is, the trick dish, the spectacle you half expected. You can't help but laugh. Rome really does love its surprises. The night presses on the food ever stranger, the wine ever stronger. You recline watching the chaos unfold, amused and bewildered in equal measure. This isn't just dining. It's a test of stamina, an audition for society, and a carnival of oddities rolled into one. You wipe honey from your fingers again and wonder not for the first time how anyone survives a single Roman banquet with both dignity and digestion intact. The night presses on the food ever stranger, the wine ever stronger. You recline watching the chaos unfold, amused and bewildered in equal measure. This isn't just dining. It's a test of stamina, an audition for society, and a carnival of oddities rolled into one. You wipe honey from your fingers again and wonder not for the first time how anyone survives a single Roman banquet with both dignity and digestion intact. You stagger from the banquet hall into the cooler night air of the forum, only to notice that your tunic is smeared with honey and a wayward pomegranate stain. In Rome, though, appearances mean everything, and the way you dress speaks louder than any toast at dinner. As you walk, you begin to realize that clothing here isn't just fabric, it's language, status, and sometimes even suggestion. You glance down at your own simple drape, then look around. The senators glide by in dazzlingly white togas, carefully folded to project gravitas. Maintaining that pure white glow takes more effort than you'd think. Slave labor with chalk and urine was the trick, a detail your grateful modern laundry never adopted. Mainstream fact, the toga wasn't everyday wear. It was reserved for public occasions and formal business. Most ordinary Romans preferred tunics for practicality. A young woman passes with bangles clinking on her wrists, her stola dyed a deep saffron yellow. Perfume wafts after her, cinnamon imported at great cost from Arabia. The smell is subtle but unmistakable, and you realize it's less about masking odors and more about announcing presence. quirky tidbit Romans sometimes used perfume not just on their bodies, but on pets, and even the household walls. Imagine a cat strolling by, smelling like roses, confusing but stylish. Historians still argue whether bright colors signaled luxury or scandal. Some sources suggest a matron wearing crimson drew admiration, while others insist it hinted at something less respectable. Tonight, you see both admiration and raised eyebrows ripple through the crowd. The ambiguity, you decide, is half the fun. You pass a group of men in dark woolen cloaks, hoods pulled low. They mutter as they walk, ignoring the brightness around them. Stoics perhaps signaling philosophy with fashion plainness as a badge of discipline. Next to them, a dandy struts in shimmering silk from the east, the fabric catching lamplight like water. His sandals sport elaborate straps that climb up his calves, as much decoration as footwear. Rome, it seems, is a catwalk of contradictions. You catch yourself comparing in your own time a pair of sneakers or a designer label might broadcast wealth or taste. Here, it's the dye of your tunic, the cut of your cloak, the ring on your finger. One senator adjusts his massive gold signet ring repeatedly, making sure it catches the lamplight. Another man fiddles with a small pendant shaped like a phallus, the same kind of amulet you noticed earlier at the Venus shrine. Subtlety isn't always the Roman way. Perfume lingers everywhere, mixing with smoke and sweat. Someone brushes past you, their cloak leaving behind the scent of myrrh. You think back to the baths earlier, steam oil and crocodile dung sunscreen. Here in the Forum, the layering continues, clean, skin-oiled and perfumed fabrics, carefully chosen jewelry shining. The body is a billboard, every detail curated. A whisper drifts from a doorway. Two figures linger close, one adjusting the other's clasp with slow fingers. Clothing becomes not just display, but excuse for touch, for leaning in too near. You feel the intimacy of it, the way fabric can invite or forbid. A dropped cloak, a bared shoulder, an extra splash of saffron dye, all small signals in the intricate game of Roman interaction. You chuckle quietly at one man whose toga is slipping, exposing more leg than intended. His friend quickly tugs it back, hissing under his breath. Somewhere a poet once wrote that fashion was as dangerous as war, and tonight you believe it. Rome is a battlefield of impressions where a poorly tied knot could wound your reputation. You pass under an archway, lamps flickering overhead, and glance back at the flow of humanity. Senators, matrons, philosophers, merchants, slaves, all stitched into a tapestry of wool, linen, silk, and leather. You realize that the language of clothing is as essential to Rome as Latin itself. You adjust your tunic, wondering what you've just said without opening your mouth. The night leads you toward a quieter courtyard where candles flicker in bronze holders and voices dip into hushed negotiations. You quickly realize you've wandered into the world of Roman marriages, less about fluttering hearts and more about contracts, alliances, and the exchange of wealth. A pair of families sit opposite one another. Fathers, stern mothers, watchful daughters, silent. You sink into the shadows, listening as if eavesdropping on a stage play with very high stakes. A scribe unfurls a scroll, noting down dowries: how many acres of farmland, how many slaves, how many amphorae of wine. The girl at the center of it all keeps her gaze, lowered fingers, twisting the hem of her stola. You want to reach out to ask what she thinks. But in this society, her voice is rarely invited. Mainstream fact, Roman marriages were less about romance and more about consolidating property and political ties. For elite families who you married could strengthen your path to the Senate or doom your ambitions entirely. Historians still argue whether young women had any real say in these arrangements. Some sources suggest consent was at least formally required. Others paint a picture of pure parental authority. Tonight, in this candlelit courtyard, the daughter's silence feels like its own answer. Quirky tidbits: certain Roman wedding rituals involved carrying the bride across the threshold. Not for romance, but to prevent her from tripping, since stumbling was considered a terrible omen. Imagine telling your friends today, "He carried me inside because ancient superstition said I might hex the marriage otherwise." It takes some of the sparkle out of the tradition. You notice the father of the groom pressing his argument, promising to treat the bride with dignity. His tone is smooth, but you've already overheard his earlier boasts about securing a valuable vineyard with this union. The bride is currency as much as companion. The mothers exchange glances, reading each other with subtle expressions that speak louder than the men's words. Women may not hold the pen, but they navigate the undercurrents. Nearby, a young boy complains that he's bored tugging on his mother's sleeve. She hushes him, handing over a honey cake to keep him quiet. The contrast is stark, children being bribed with sweets, while their elder sister is bargained away like part of the household pantry. You sigh, realizing the peculiar blend of ordinary and extraordinary that defines Roman life. Remember the lettuce debates at dinner. Here a platter of it appears again as part of the pre-wedding feast. Someone jokes that it will either fuel the wedding night or make the groom fall asleep too soon. Laughter ripples, easing the tension for a moment. You can't decide whether the humor is harmless or cruel, but the bride doesn't look amused. A musician begins to play a gentle tune on the lyre, softening the atmosphere. The negotiations continue around the music, the scribe's quill scratching steadily. You imagine how many times this scene has played out repeated across villas and courtyards, shaping the destinies of families and the empire itself. Each marriage is a thread woven into Rome's vast political fabric. As the contract nears completion, the bride's mother leans close and whispers something into her daughter's ear. For the first time, the girl lifts her gaze, eyes glinting with something unreadable: defiance, resignation, or perhaps a quiet dream she refuses to surrender. You find yourself rooting for her, silently urging her to carve out space for herself in a world that rarely allows it. The candles burn lower, casting longer shadows. The scroll is rolled and sealed, hands clasped to mark the agreement. A cheer rises, but it feels hollow, more transaction than celebration. You step back into the night air, carrying the weight of what you've witnessed. In Rome, even love begins with ink on parchment and the rustle of coin. You leave the courtyard of arranged marriages behind and wander down a shaded path lined with cypress trees. The air is cooler here, hushed, carrying only the distant hum of the city. Lanterns flicker in the gardens of nearby villas, casting soft light across marble statues and manicured hedges. It's in these spaces, half hidden, half open, that another side of Roman life flourishes: the world of hidden affairs. You pause at the edge of a pergola, listening as whispers slip between the leaves. Two figures linger under the vines, their voices low, their laughter quick and nervous. One is a senator's wife, judging by her embroidered stola. The other a poet with ink stains still smudged across his fingers. They lean closer than politeness requires, their conversation punctuated with touches disguised as accidents. The poet recites a line of verse, and the woman hides her smile behind her hand. You recognize the theater of secrecy gestures stretched just enough to thrill, but never enough to expose. Mainstream fact Roman literature is filled with accounts of affairs. Ovid's Ars Amatoria practically gave instructions for how to woo someone in the circus stands or at a dinner party. While adultery was officially condemned in practice, it was common enough to become a subject of satire and scandal alike. Quirky tidbit: one poet bragged about using his slave as a lookout during trysts, a human alarm system, to warn of approaching husbands. You picture a weary servant rolling his eyes and thinking, "Not again, sir." Some jobs really don't get enough hazard pay. Historians still argue whether Roman women were truly as constrained as the law suggested. Legally, adultery could lead to exile or worse, but elite women often wielded enough influence to sidestep punishment. Was this hypocrisy baked into the system? Or were we only hearing about the scandals that slipped through tonight? The truth feels both everywhere and nowhere, flickering, like the lantern light. You continue along the path, spotting other signs of hidden meetings. A pair of sandals abandoned beneath a bench. A wine cup tipped over in the grass. Voices silenced suddenly as you pass by. The gardens of Rome are not just for roses and fountains. They are stages for clandestine plays, rehearsed in whispers, remembered in rumors. At one villa, you glimpse a nobleman slipping through a side gate with his cloak drawn tight. He glances around nervously, but his hasty steps tell the story. You imagine the awkward breakfast tomorrow, when polite faces gather at the triclinium, as if nothing happened. Rome is skilled at pretending. Remember the banquets you just left. All that wine, the laughter, the sly touches. It doesn't always end with goodbyes at the door. Some slip away into shadows, others into storerooms, some perhaps into scandals that will outlive them in gossip for decades. You realize that the very architecture of Rome, its colonnades, its sprawling gardens, its labyrinth of alleys, encourages secrecy as much as spectacle. A breeze rustles through the trees, carrying the scent of roses and damp earth. You picture a matron plucking petals to sprinkle on her lover's path, or perhaps hiding love notes beneath them. You smile, remembering that earlier amulet shaped like a wink from the gods. Here in the garden, it feels almost like Venus herself is in on the joke. The poet and senator's wife slip away into the night, their laughter fading. You stay behind, staring at the empty space they left, aware of how many lives are stitched together by these secret threads. Affairs may be hidden, but they shape politics, reputations, and family legacies. Rome survives on both its marble monuments and its whispered rendezvous. You step back onto the main street, lantern in hand, the night thicker now. The city hasn't quieted. It never does. Yet after peeking into its shadows, you feel you've uncovered a truer Rome, one where secrets are as common as sandals and just as easy to slip off when the moment calls. You wander away from the garden shadows and find yourself drifting toward a small shrine tucked between two apartment blocks. The scent of incense lingers, mixing with the more familiar odor of cooking fires and wet stone. Here, priests chant softly, their words echoing against the walls as curious onlookers murmur nearby. Rome is never far from its gods, and in matters of intimacy, the divine has a seat at the table. You edge closer, ears pricked as myths and morality tangle in the smoky air. One priest raises a carved figure of Venus draped in garlands. He speaks of her blessing lovers, of her role in guiding marriages, of her laughter that echoes in every stolen kiss. The crowd nods, some devout, others smirking. A poet in the corner mutters that Venus seems busier than Jupiter himself, drawing chuckles from those close enough to hear. You catch yourself smiling. Sarcasm, it seems, is timeless. Mainstream fact: Roman religion was a blend of imported Greek deities, local household spirits, and countless cults. Venus symbolized love and desire, but gods like Priapus depicted with exaggerated, almost comical masculinity. also played roles in shaping public notions of sexuality. Shrines like these dotted the city, half sacred, half suggestive, quirky tidbit. Some Romans painted protective images of Priapus on their garden walls, not just as decoration, but as a warning against thieves. The message was crude, but clear steel from me, and the god of oversized retribution will come for you. Imagine posting that sign outside your garage today, effective if not exactly tasteful. Historians still argue whether ordinary Romans truly took these myths literally, or if they used them as cultural shorthand. Did they fear divine punishment for lust? Or did they simply enjoy telling tales where the gods were just as naughty as mortals? Watching the shrine tonight, you sense a little of both reverence mixed with humor, morality balanced with mischief. The priest shifts to a sterner tone, invoking Juno, goddess of marriage, and scolding the crowd about fidelity. Some roll their eyes discreetly. You recall the senator's wife slipping away with her poet earlier, and the irony makes you chuckle. Morality here is like Roman law itself, grand in theory, flexible in practice. A storyteller picks up where the priest leaves off weaving myths into warnings. He recounts how Mars and Venus were caught in a golden net by her husband Vulcan, paraded before the other gods as an example of scandal. The crowd laughs, not horrified but amused, as if the story were less cautionary tale and more soap opera rerun. You wonder if anyone really walked away deterred, or if they simply gained new ideas for their own escapades. Remember the lettuce debates at dinner. The storyteller insists that Venus herself adored the plant, claiming it boosted her powers. Someone in the crowd heckles that it only made them sleepy, and the laughter ripples again. Myths are malleable here, shaped to fit whatever mood the listeners bring. You drift to the back of the crowd where children play with little clay figurines of gods, laughing as they knock them together in mock battles. To them, morality is still a game rules as bendable as clay. Perhaps that's the real heart of Roman religion, a mix of fear, play, and tradition, all blended into the rhythm of daily life. The incense smoke thickens, curling around your head. For a moment, you feel the weight of centuries pressing down the prayers, the jokes, the whispered doubts. Rome is a city where gods are everywhere, on walls and gardens, at banquets, and yet their lessons are interpreted as freely as a poet's verse. You exhale slowly, letting the smoke drift past, and step back into the street. The night feels heavier now, but also clearer. You've seen how morality is preached, how myths are bent, how people live between the sacred and the scandalous. In Rome, even the gods laugh, and their laughter sounds suspiciously like gossip carried on the wind. You follow the murmur of voices toward the amphitheater, where the crowd's energy hums like a distant storm. Even at night, the stories of gladiators spill through the streets, carried in whispers, ballads, and tavern boasts. You climb onto a stone step near the outer wall, listening as a pair of young men swap tales of their favorite fighters. Their eyes shine with a mixture of awe and something deeper, a fascination that seems to blur the line between admiration and desire. Mainstream fact, gladiators were slaves, prisoners of war, or men desperate for money and fame, forced to fight in brutal spectacles. Yet they also became icons, celebrated in graffiti, adored by crowds, and sometimes pursued by the upper classes. One carving even shows a noblewoman sighing that her heart swoons for the gladiator Salatus. You grin at the thought celebrity crushes are hardly a modern invention. Quirky tidbit historians record that some women actually requested gladiator sweat or even scrapings from their skin as aphrodisiacs. Picture someone today bottling eau de arena and charging a fortune for it. The marketing campaign practically writes itself, though you're not sure Sephora would carry it. Historians still argue whether gladiators were genuinely admired as romantic figures or simply fetishized for their dangerous lives. Some claim their allure was rooted in raw survival, others that it was the forbidden thrill of mixing with society's lowest. Tonight, listening to the eager voices you suspect it was, both danger has always had a way of drawing people close. You slip through the gates into the shadow of the arena itself. The sand lies quiet, now only faint moonlight brushing across the surface. In the silence, you imagine the roar of 50,000 throats, the clash of swords, the spray of dust and sweat. Your skin prickles, and you wonder what it must have felt like to step out onto that floor, knowing your life was entertainment. A guard half asleep at his post mutters about the last fight. He says the crowd went wild for a pair of Thracian fighters cheering them on as though they were demigods. He leans closer, confiding with a smirk that senators' wives sometimes slipped gladiators, tokens, rings, coins, even love notes. You shake your head, marveling at how scandal always finds its way into the arena. Remember the banquet dove pie. That same spirit of spectacle breathes here, except the stakes are higher. The games blur lines between admiration and lust, between violence and beauty, between freedom and slavery. A gladiator may be cheered like a hero one day and carried out lifeless the next. Yet his name lingers on lips long after. You picture the women in the stands, veils pulled low, eyes bright as swords flash below. You imagine the merchants gossiping about which gladiator is favored, which one rumored to have spent the night in a wealthy matron's villa. The arena becomes not just a stage for combat, but a marketplace of desire transgressions played out in sand and shadow. A faint breeze kicks up dust, carrying with it the ghost of the crowd's roar. You close your eyes hearing it swell, the cheers, the chants, the gasps. Somewhere in that noise, admiration curdles into longing, fear turns into fascination. You shiver, unsure if it's the night air or the weight of all those unseen eyes. As you step back into the quiet streets, you realize the gladiator's allure is not just about muscles and scars. It's about mortality laid bare, about the reminder that every kiss, every glance, every heartbeat is temporary. Rome, you think, understands this better than most. Perhaps that's why its people crave both blood and beauty in equal measure. You slip into a narrow alley off the Forum, drawn by the glow of an oil lamp above a physician's doorway. Inside, the air is thick with the smell of herbs vinegar and something metallic you can't quite place. Shelves sag beneath clay jars labeled in cramped Latin script, their contents a wild assortment: dried lizards, ground poppy, powdered lead. You shiver. This is Roman medicine, equal parts experiment tradition and outright guesswork. A weary doctor in a stained tunic leans over a patient scraping at a wound with a bronze scalpel. He mutters about balancing humors, the four fluids: blood phlegm, black bile, yellow bile that supposedly govern the body. Mainstream fact: Galen, Rome's most famous physician, built an entire system on these ideas, and his influence lingered for more than 1,000 years. Tonight, though, it feels less like science and more like improvisation. On a nearby table lies a collection of strange tools: hooks, clamps, and long needles glinting in lamplight. The doctor picks up a sponge soaked in vinegar and presses it to the patient's skin, assuring him it will cleanse and cool. You're not convinced, but the patient grits his teeth and nods. Quirky tidbit: some Romans believed wearing the right amulet could ward off disease, even one carved from a bezoar. Yes, the hardened lump from an animal's stomach. others swore by placing pigeon droppings on wounds. You imagine a patient today demanding, "Doctor, where's my pigeon poultice?" and nearly laugh aloud. Historians still argue whether Roman medicine was more effective than harmful. On one hand, they pioneered surgical instruments and public sanitation with aqueducts and sewers. On the other, they prescribed remedies like ground wolf liver for infertility or powdered mouse for stomach aches. It was a strange blend of brilliance and superstition, trial and error written on human bodies. A young apprentice grinds herbs in a mortar, the rhythmic thud echoing in the room. He sprinkles mint into wine, swearing it eases indigestion. A woman in the corner clutches a bundle of garlic and rue charms against the evil eye. The boundaries between healing magic and faith are as blurred as the steam rising from the cauldron on the hearth. You lean closer to the shelves, eyes catching on jars of opium resin and mandrake root. Both are used for pain relief, though in the wrong dose, they are more deadly than soothing. The doctor notices your gaze and chuckles, saying, "Everything heals or kills. It depends on measure." You think of the endless cups of wine at the banquet and nod. Moderation seems to be the eternal challenge. Remember the gladiators you just left behind? Some of them come here after the arena battered and bleeding. Their wounds are sewn with flax thread, their pain dulled with poppy juice, their scars treated with honey to stave off infection. Honey sweetness turned into medicine. It almost redeems the rest of the bizarre recipes. The patient rises shaky but alive and presses a coin into the doctor's hand. Outside, a priest chants nearby, offering prayers to Apollo for health. Inside, the apprentice stirs another concoction, muttering about humors. Medicine in Rome is always caught between gods and science, belief, and blade. You step back into the alley air cooler. Now the stars glimmering faintly above. Your skin tingles with the memory of vinegar and herbs, and you find yourself grateful for modern pharmacies, even with their high prices. At least they don't hand out mouse powder. Still, you can't help but respect the Roman determination. When faced with pain, they reached for every tool, every herb, every prayer they could. Survival, after all, never waits for certainty. The alley gives way to a broader street, where the murmur of voices sharpens into gasps and hurried whispers. You step into a crowd clustered around a bronze statue, its torch casting jittering light across anxious faces. A crier's voice rises above the noise, announcing the latest scandal: a senator's affair uncovered. A matron accused a household in disgrace. You feel the shift in the air, that mix of titillation and fear that always accompanies public shaming. The details spill like spilled wine names, places lurid hints. The senator is accused of consorting with his own son's tutor. His wife, in turn, is said to have entertained a gladiator behind the garden wall. Whether any of it is true hardly matters. The spectacle is what Rome craves. Mainstream fact adultery was officially criminalized under Augustus's moral reforms, punishable by exile to remote islands. Entire families could be humiliated by a single indiscretion. Yet the higher the rank, the easier it often was to evade punishment. A woman nearby shakes her head, muttering that everyone knows half the Senate sneaks around after dark. A man beside her laughs, saying, "And the other half just aren't clever enough to avoid being caught." Quirky tidbits. Some gossip mongers in Rome wrote lampoons, little poems posted on walls, mocking officials for their indiscretions. Imagine today's graffiti, but in perfect dactylic hexameter, roasting politicians for their love lives. Historians still argue whether these scandals truly reflected rampant immorality, or if they were weapons of political warfare. Was the senator actually guilty, or was his rival spreading tales to ruin him? Tonight, the crowd doesn't care. Truth and rumor taste the same when whispered in firelight. You edge closer, watching as the crier nails a proclamation to the statue's base. The senator will be summoned before a magistrate, his wife possibly stripped of her dowry. People mutter about whether she'll be sent to an island or merely confined to her father's home. Children crane their necks wide-eyed as if watching a play unfold. Rome teaches its lessons in public. You glance up at the villa windows above their shutters tightly closed. Behind them, families huddle whispering about their own secrets, hoping the torchlight never falls on their doors. Everyone pretends outraged tonight, but everyone knows how fragile reputations are, how easy it is to fall from marble pedestals into the gutter of gossip. Remember the garden rendezvous you stumbled upon earlier? This is the risk, the other half of the thrill. For every whispered verse in the shadows, there's the chance of exile, ruin, or disgrace shouted in the forum. You feel the tension coil in your chest, desire and danger twined like ivy on a column. As the crowd disperses, you overhear one old man snort, "They'll be back at the banquet table next month as if nothing happened." You suspect he's right. Rome punishes, but Rome forgets quickly when new scandals arrive. Hypocrisy isn't a flaw here. It's the grease that keeps the gears of society spinning. You turn down another street, the torches behind you dimming. The echoes of scandal follow you, lingering in your ears like an unwelcome song. In Rome, no one is ever entirely safe, and yet no one can resist the pull of forbidden games. You wonder which whisper tomorrow will bring, and whether you'll find yourself among the crowd again, craning your neck for the next downfall. You drift away from the scandalous whispers and follow the faint glow of another gathering. This time not around a crier or shrine, but beneath a colonnade where men in plain cloaks and worn sandals sit in a circle. No music, no wine, just voices weaving arguments under the night sky. These are philosophers, trading ideas like others trade gossip, and their subject tonight is as intimate as any feast or affair. What does it mean to live well, and where does desire fit into that? A Stoic speaks first. His voice steady, his gaze fixed far beyond the columns. He insists the wise man masters his passions, that true freedom is freedom from being ruled by lust or fear. You watch the crowd nod, though a few smirk, likely remembering their own indulgences at last night's banquet. Mainstream fact Stoicism was popular among Roman elites, teaching virtue through self-control and reason, and some emperors like Marcus Aurelius would later shape their rule with its philosophy. An Epicurean leans forward, countering that pleasure is the natural goal of life, though not endless indulgence, just enough to avoid pain and cultivate peace. He gestures with his cup of watered wine, claiming that the simplest meals, the quietest evenings, and the gentlest companionships bring more joy than feasts of flamingo tongues. You can't help but think he has a point, though you'd still like one more bite of honey dormouse. Quirky tidbit: some philosophers claimed even cabbage could be a cure for excess desire, eaten raw as a kind of moral antidote. You picture a Roman parent handing their lovesick child a head of cabbage and muttering, "Here, this will calm you down," and you nearly laugh aloud. Historians still argue whether ordinary Romans truly embraced these philosophies, or if they were mainly intellectual games for the educated. Were the lessons about discipline and moderation applied at home or abandoned as soon as the wine flowed? Listening tonight, you suspect both are true ideals spoken in marble halls. Realities lived in candlelit gardens. The circle of voices grows louder as they debate. A cynic sneers that all this talk of virtue is nonsense, that society itself is the problem. He strips away his cloak dramatically, declaring that freedom means shameless honesty, not rules about when to blush or bow. Some laugh, others shake their heads. You think of the graffiti on Roman walls, often crude but honest, and wonder if the cynics had more followers than they realized. Remember the gladiator's allure, the way danger drew admiration. A young philosopher brings it up now, insisting that the arena shows how fleeting life is and why we should use our days wisely. Another counters that chasing lust is no wiser than chasing applause. Their voices overlap, weaving like threads in a tapestry, reason and passion, indulgence and restraint, all pulling against one another. As you listen, you notice how the philosophers speak not just with words, but with their bodies, one stroking his beard thoughtfully, another waving arms in exasperation, another smiling faintly as if savoring an inside joke. These gestures feel as much performance as belief. Perhaps philosophy here is less about certainty and more about conversation itself. The act of wrestling with questions no one can settle. The oil lamps flicker lower, the air cooler on your skin. The circle slowly breaks, men drifting back to their homes, still muttering half arguments under their breath. You step away, head buzzing, heart oddly calm. Rome debates as fiercely as it feasts, and somehow both leave you full. You wonder whether tomorrow the same voices will be reciting verses at a banquet, or whispering in gardens, or scribbling scandalous poems. Philosophy, like everything else in this city, mingles with daily life, contradictory, untidy, and endlessly alive. The philosophers' voices fade behind you, replaced by the softer rhythm of the marketplace winding down for the night. Lanterns swing on hooks, illuminating stalls still piled with figs, olives, and rough loaves of bread. You drift among them, watching ordinary Romans finish their day. This isn't the marble world of senators and philosophers, but the pulse of the city itself. The routines, the chores, the simple moments where survival and small pleasures intertwine. A baker wipes flour from his forearms, slipping a warm loaf into your hands. He grins, saying that bread is life, and bread with honey is happiness. Mainstream fact: bread was the staple of the Roman diet, eaten daily by rich and poor alike. The state even distributed grain through the annona to keep the masses fed and content. You tear off a piece, the crust crackling, the steam rising into the cool night, and realize the truth in his words. Nearby, a woman balances clay jars on her head, her two children trailing behind. One boy clutches a wooden toy cart, pulling it across the stones with clattering wheels. Their laughter echoes a counterpoint to the weary sighs of their mother. You catch yourself smiling. No Senate decree could make this scene less familiar. Quirky tidbit archaeologists have found graffiti not just about politics or love, but about ordinary frustrations. One reads, "I am amazed, wall, that you have not collapsed. So many tiresome scribblers write on you." You imagine a cranky Roman dad muttering that after seeing his kids scrawl on the plaster. Historians still argue whether the so-called plebeian life was truly miserable or simply modest. Literary sources written by elites often painted peasants as perpetually downtrodden. Yet artifacts, charms, trinkets, even children's shoes suggest moments of comfort and joy. Tonight, walking these streets, you feel the answer lies somewhere in between. You turn a corner and find a cluster of neighbors gathered around a communal hearth. A woman stirs lentils in a bronze pot, handing bowls to those seated on benches. The chatter flows easily. Complaints about rising grain prices, jokes about a neighbor's donkey, sighs about how long the laundry takes to dry in this damp weather. The firelight flickers across their faces, warm and ordinary. One man leans close to another, whispering with a grin. They laugh, shoulders touching, the gesture small but unmistakable. Desire lives here too, tucked into everyday spaces. Not the scandalous affairs of senators, not the exaggerated myths of gods, but quiet glances over bowls of lentils, fleeting touches that might bloom or fade without anyone ever writing them down. You pass by the insula, the apartment blocks that tower precariously above the streets. Laundry sways overhead tunics, catching the night breeze. Through open shutters, you glimpse families settling for bed. A mother brushing her daughter's hair. A boy lighting a lamp for his father to read, by an old woman tucking a blanket over her grandson. Ordinary routines stitched into the grandeur of empire like humble threads. Remember the lettuce debates. You hear a neighbor shout through a thin wall, grumbling that his wife fed him too much of it again. Laughter erupts on the other side, a small comedy of domestic life. You shake your head, amused at how one vegetable can haunt you across banquets' courtyards and now cramped apartments. The smell of roasted chestnuts drifts down the street from a vendor's cart. You buy a handful, their shells warm against your palms. As you crack them open, you realize how much of Roman life is just this small comforts against the backdrop of a demanding world. Survival is not only about gladiators and grand feasts. It is about bread, warmth, laughter, and the company of those close enough to lean on. As you walk on chestnut shells crunching underfoot, you feel the weight of the empire less as marble and laws, and more as a patchwork of daily lives. It's in these moments, quiet and unrecorded, that Rome breathes most vividly. You wander farther from the city's heart, following the road that leads outward through the gates. The air changes here, less perfume and smoke, more earth and dust. Beyond the walls, the empire stretches vast and varied, a quilt of provinces stitched together by conquest and trade. You step onto this patchwork, where Roman customs collide with local traditions, shaping intimacy in ways that surprise even seasoned travelers. A caravan rumbles past carts, creaking beneath baskets of Egyptian dates and amphorae of Syrian wine. Merchants chatter in multiple tongues, their gestures filling in the gaps. Mainstream fact, the Roman Empire spanned 3 continents, and each province colored the culture of Rome itself. What you eat, wear, or believe in one corner might be unrecognizable in another. You pause at a roadside shrine where Egyptian icons sit beside Roman Lares. The goddess Isis gazes serenely, flowers at her feet. A woman whispers a prayer, asking for fertility, tying a strand of her hair to the altar. Quirky tidbit Isis cults became so popular in Rome that some households placed little statues of her next to Venus, hedging their bets for divine favor. Imagine keeping both your horoscope app and your weather app open just in case. Historians still argue whether Rome imposed its morals on the provinces or absorbed more than it gave. Was Roman intimacy exported, or was it reshaped at every border? The evidence points both ways. Laws stamped out some customs, yet temples and art suggest local gods and festivals thrived. Tonight, walking this borderland, you sense the empire was less about uniformity and more about a noisy blend. You hear music drifting from a Gallic village, drums, pipes, voices raised in festival. You step closer, watching as dancers circle a fire garlands in their hair. Laughter spilling like wine. Couples slip away into the darkness, rituals blurring into revelry. The Romans dismissed some of these traditions as barbaric, yet here they feel joyful, alive, undeniable. You catch yourself tapping your foot to the rhythm. Farther on, you reach a settlement where Eastern spices perfume the night. Families gather on rugs, sharing dates, and figs their conversations, gentle and measured. A storyteller recites tales of lovers meeting under desert stars, his voice rich and steady. You sit at the edge, listening, realizing that while the words differ, the yearning is the same as the Roman poet whispering verses at a banquet. Remember the gladiator's allure back in the arena. A merchant here boasts of his cousin, a champion fighter in the provinces. The crowd cheers his name, and one young woman sighs loudly enough to draw laughter. The fame of the fighters, it seems, travels just as quickly as the caravans. Desire, like trade, knows no borders. As the night deepens, you find yourself at a riverbank where travelers camp. Fires crackle, cloaks drape across shoulders, and stories pass from one tongue to another. A Greek sailor shares a joke about philosophers. A Roman soldier boasts of wine-soaked nights in Britannia. A local woman rolls her eyes and mutters that the Romans can't hold their drink. The laughter that follows feels timeless. You lean back, gazing at the sky. Stars scatter across the dark, the same ones you saw above the Colosseum, the same ones glinting over Egypt, Gaul, Britannia. You realize that intimacy in the empire is not a single story, but countless ones woven together. Some are whispered, some sung, some carved into temple walls. All are fragile, fleeting, and yet enduring in memory. You close your eyes, letting the sounds wash over you. The drums, the river, the laughter. Beyond Rome's marble heart lies a world of voices, each adding a note to the chorus of what it meant to live, to desire to belong in this vast empire. You turn back toward the city as dawn begins to soften the horizon, the sky fading from black to violet. The streets are quieter now, though you can still hear the occasional cart, creaking a rooster, crowing somewhere in the distance. Rome is preparing to wake, but you have one last journey to make before slipping into rest, the winding path through memory, where all you've seen blends into a single, lingering vision. You pass the amphitheater again, its arches ghostly in early light. You recall the roar of the crowd, the gleam of gladiators, the absurdity of perfume made from sweat, danger and desire braided together in sand and steel. Mainstream fact gladiatorial games continued for centuries, their appeal undimmed until the empire itself began to fracture. Yet even then, the allure of spectacle never quite died. You feel the ghost of applause in your chest. Turning down another street, you glimpse the faded remnants of graffiti, crude sketches, bitter jokes, confessions carved into plaster. They remind you of whispered garden trysts and scandalous proclamations nailed to statues. Rome's walls have always talked, whether you wanted them to or not. Quirky tidbits some Roman houses had small mosaics near their front doors, depicting phalluses not as vulgar jokes, but as charms to ward off evil. Imagine greeting guests with that kind of welcome mat. You chuckle softly, shaking your head at the empire's mix of superstition and showmanship. Historians still argue whether Rome's moral reforms truly reshaped society, or if people simply found cleverer ways to hide their secrets. After everything you've seen tonight, the banquets, the gardens, the shrines, the markets, you suspect human nature doesn't change nearly as much as laws hope it will. The sun creeps higher, washing the cobblestones in pale gold. You think back on the philosopher's circle, voices weaving about virtue and desire. You remember the baker pressing warm bread into your hands, the mother whispering comfort to her daughter, the merchant boasting about distant loves. Grand and humble, scandalous and tender Rome has shown you its contradictions like open pages of a book. Now with the city stretching and yawning awake, your steps slow. You feel the weight of the journey settling into your body, not heavy, but drowsy, as though the streets themselves are lulling you into slumber. The hum of life softens to a murmur steady, hypnotic. And so, as the light spills over the rooftops and the voices of Rome blur into background music, you let the night dissolve gently into morning. Your mind drifts across the fragments of what you've seen, the shimmer of wine in goblets, the hush of secret footsteps, in gardens the laughter at myths, retold the sting of vinegar in a physician's room, the quiet joy of neighbors sharing lentils by firelight. Each moment floats by unhurried, softened at the edges like clouds sliding across a wide sky. Your breathing slows, matching the rhythm of the city settling back into routine. Stone, brick, and marble fade into shades of gray and white in your memory, their sharp lines blurring as though distance itself is a kind of mercy. You picture the empire not as laws and armies, but as countless small gestures, hands brushing at banquets, children laughing in courtyards, lovers sneaking smiles across crowded forums. Intimacy stitched into eternity. The longer you rest with these images, the more they seem to stretch like ripples across a pond, widening until they touch the edge of dream. The voices become softer, the laughter gentler, the debates quieter until they are little more than a hum at the edge of hearing, a hum that soothes, steadies, reassures. So let your shoulders loosen. Let your eyelids grow heavy. The marble of Rome fades into mist, and the bustling city becomes only a faint echo carried on a breeze. You are safe here, wrapped in the rhythm of lives long past, cushioned by time, watched over by stars that have never stopped shining. Sleep comes easily now. Let it drift, breathe, rest,